former Indiana State Trooper David Camm, acquitted of killing his family, is now going to be getting nearly $5 million in a settlement with the state of Indiana. David Camm was convicted twice for the shooting deaths of his wife and their 2 children in their Georgetown, Indiana home in the fall of 2000. Those convictions were overturned and he was acquitted in his 3rd trial.
September 28, 2000, Georgetown, Indiana, population 2,200. The kind of town where people still leave their doors unlocked, where everybody knows your name, your car, and what time you usually get home. David Camm was 20 minutes late. He wasn't worried. He was mildly annoyed at himself. Kim was going to give him that look. Bradley had school tomorrow. Jill had just turned 5. The routine mattered in their house. He already knew what he was about to walk into. He had no idea. The garage door rises slowly, and David Camm's entire life ends in the next 4 seconds. He doesn't scream. He doesn't run. He just stops. Because the human brain, when it sees something it was never built to process, doesn't react the way you think it will. It just goes quiet. Kim is on the garage floor. He gets down to her face, looks into her eyes. She's already gone. He stands, turns toward the car, and this is the detail that will stay with you. Kim's shoes, both of them, sitting side by side on the roof of the Bronco, toes pointing outward, placed there, deliberately, carefully, in the middle of a crime scene involving 3 bodies. He doesn't have time to process that, because Jill is still in her seatbelt, and Bradley, 7 years old, is stretched toward the back of the Bronco, like he'd been scrambling, clawing, trying to get away from whatever was happening just feet behind him. Bradley is still warm. David pulls him out, starts CPR. Because what do you do when your 7-year-old son still has warmth in his body? You don't stop. You just don't stop. He runs inside, calls his former colleagues at the Indiana State Police Sellersburg post. The dispatcher transfers him, and then David Camm is placed on hold. He stands in that garage, his family around him, and he listens to hold music, for what must have felt like the longest minutes of his life. When the supervisor finally picks up, David says 6 words. "Get everybody out here. They're dead." Here is what you need to know before we go any further. A suspect was arrested 3 days later, convicted twice, spent 4,078 days in prison, and the gray sweatshirt sitting on that garage floor, the one that didn't belong to anyone in that family, contained DNA that would have pointed directly to the real killer from night 1. Nobody tested it for 4.5 years, not because they forgot, because somebody made sure they didn't have to. This is the story of what happens when a justice system stops looking for the truth and starts protecting a lie. Before we go further, this documentary contains content related to violent crime and the deaths of children. There are no graphic descriptions in this video, but the subject matter is deeply serious. If you're watching with younger viewers, use your discretion. If you're new here, welcome. Drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and come back every week. And to everyone who has been here, thank you. Genuinely. Your support is what keeps stories like this one getting told. Now, let's go back to the beginning. David Camm was born and raised in Georgetown, Indiana, a place so small and so tight-knit that the roads themselves carry family names. Lockhart Road, where David and Kim eventually built their home, was named after his mother's side of the family. That is how deep these roots went. This was not just a town David lived in. It was a town that was built around people he shared blood with. He joined the Indiana State Police in 1989, the same year he married Kimberly Wren. Within months of joining, he was selected for the Emergency Response Unit, the elite tactical division of the ISP. Not everyone gets that call. He earned it. For 10 years he served, respected, decorated, known throughout the department as someone who was serious about the job. Kim built her own life alongside his. She rose to senior accountant at Aegon Investments. She was sharp, driven, and by every account from people who knew her, warm in a way that was completely genuine. David's own words about the first time he saw her. "I was immediately very attracted to her. Beautiful young lady, extremely intelligent, kind, huge heart." They had met in 1984, 5 years before they married. By the time they walked down that aisle, they had been building toward each other for half a decade. Bradley arrived in 1993, Jill in February 1995. The family settled on Lockhart Road, the house David and Kim designed and built themselves. Kim's sister said it plainly. Kim had gotten what she wanted. She had her white picket fence. But the picture had cracks in it that only people close to them could see. David had been unfaithful, not once, not briefly. Multiple women, across the length of their marriage, starting within months of their wedding. He left Kim once while she was pregnant with Jill to move in with another woman. He pursued female colleagues while in uniform. Kim knew. They fought through it. They rebuilt. And by the year 2000, by most external accounts, they had arrived somewhere more stable. In May of that year, David resigned from the Indiana State Police after a decade of service. His uncle, Sam Lockhart, Georgetown Community Church pastor, local businessman, the kind of man whose name literally ran through the veins of this town, offered him a position at his basement waterproofing company. Double the pay, predictable hours, home for dinner, time to help with homework. David took it. Kim approved of it. 4 months later, on a Thursday evening in September, everything burned to the ground. September 28th started like every other Thursday. David and Kim both worked. Bradley and Jill went to school. After school, Kim picked up both kids, took Bradley to swim practice, brought them both home. David headed to Georgetown Community Church at 7 p.m. Thursday night basketball. 11 men. 3 games. The kind of ritual that had become as automatic as breathing. Around 9:20 p.m., the games ended. David got in his car, 5-minute drive home. He was thinking about Kim's reaction when he walked in late. We already know what happened next. First responders arrived within minutes of that call. The lead investigator on scene would later describe what he walked into as probably one of the most horrific crimes he had seen in his 33-year career. The crime scene was processed through the night, photographed, measured, cataloged. 2 things at that scene didn't fit anything investigators had seen before. Kim's shoes. She had been wearing them when she came home. That was confirmed. They were not on her feet. They were on the roof of the Bronco, placed with a deliberateness that had no innocent explanation. Side by side, toes pointing outward. The coroner's report would later show bruising and deep abrasions on the tops of both of Kim's feet. Marks consistent with someone violently handling her feet while she was still alive. Nobody could explain the shoes. Investigators noted it, moved on, and filed it. And then there was the gray sweatshirt, found on the garage floor, right beside Bradley's body. Prison-issue fabric, worn and faded. Inside the collar, in black marker, one word: backbone. It did not belong to David. It did not belong to Kim. It did not belong to either child. No one in that family had ever seen it before. Investigators pushed it into an evidence bag, closed the flap, and set it aside. 3 days later, they put handcuffs on David Camm. Floyd County prosecutor Stan Faith arrived at the scene around 10 p.m. that night. He looked at the garage. He looked at David, former state trooper, blood on his clothes, invisible shock. And within the first hours of that investigation, without a word of public announcement, a decision was made. David Camm was the suspect. Not a person of interest, not someone to be eliminated. The suspect. From that moment forward, the investigation was not built to find the truth. It was built to confirm one conclusion. Rod Englert, a well-known, well-respected private blood spatter analyst out of Oregon, was Faith's first call for forensic support. Englert was unavailable. He sent his assistant instead, a man named Robert Stites. Jim Neimer was the most experienced detective working that scene that night. He took one look at Robert Stites and immediately felt something was wrong. He pulled his superiors aside and said it directly. "This man does not look qualified to be here. I do not want him on this scene." His superiors told him to stand down. Stan Faith wanted Stites involved. That was the end of the discussion. Robert Stites, brought in originally to photograph and document, became the forensic authority on a triple homicide. David's basketball shirt went to the lab. 8 small dots of blood, microscopic, near the bottom hem of the shirt. Stites examined them. His conclusion: high-velocity impact spatter, HVIS, the phenomenon that occurs when a bullet strikes a body at close range. Blood atomizes into a fine mist and travels backward toward the shooter. Stites was unambiguous. The only way those stains get on that shirt is from blowback from a gunshot wound. This is scientific documentation. 100% certain. The arrest warrant was built around it. Stites kept going. He pointed at a long ribbon of blood across the garage floor, dark red at one end, fading to almost clear at the other. He told investigators the color change meant one thing: someone had used a cleaning substance to wipe the scene before police arrived. David cleaned it, panicked, gave up, called it in. The reality, which any trained forensic technician would have recognized immediately, was serum separation, a completely normal biological process that occurs as blood dries. It is taught in entry-level forensic courses. Stites either didn't know that or chose to ignore it. He walked the scene further, pointed at the garage door, the breezeway siding, a mop in the corner, a jacket nearby. All of it, he said, showed signs of HVIS and cleanup. The garage door was removed from its hinges and sent for testing. No blood. Oil and gasoline residue. The mop, negative. The drain, negative. Every surface Stites flagged came back clean. ISP technician Lynn Scamahorn, who was present throughout the entire evidence collection process, had immediate documented reservations about Stites' methodology. Those reservations were noted. They were ignored. Nobody verified Stites' findings. Nobody checked his credentials. Nobody asked the follow-up questions that should have been automatic. In a courtroom, science is God, and Robert Stites was about to stand in front of a jury and play the role. David Camm was arrested on October 1st, 2000, 3 days after the murders. No murder weapon, no verified forensic evidence, 3 counts of murder. The gray sweatshirt, bagged, shelved, never once sent for DNA analysis. 11 men, not 1, not 3. 11 separate human beings who stood in that gymnasium and watched David Camm play basketball on the night his family was murdered. The medical examiner placed time of death at approximately 8 p.m. David was standing on that court at 8 p.m. Every single one of those 11 men confirmed it independently. So the prosecution built a theory. David slipped out during the second game, the one he sat out as a substitute, drove 5 minutes home, killed 3 people, drove back, retook his position on the sidelines, and not one person in that gym noticed he was gone. The entire window, 15 minutes. 8 of those minutes were driving. That left 7 minutes to commit a triple homicide, leave no witnesses, return without a trace of urgency, and sit back down on that bench calm enough that 11 men who knew him personally saw nothing unusual. 7 minutes. Think about that number. Hold it. Then the phone records arrived, and prosecutors believed they had found their proof. A call logged from the Camm residence at 7:19 p.m., while David claimed to be at basketball. He was lying, they said. The records proved it. Except Indiana sits across 2 time zones, Eastern and Central, and the phone company's billing system was logging timestamps incorrectly across that boundary. When the error was corrected, that call had been placed at 6:19 p.m., a full hour before basketball began. David had called a customer before leaving the house. Routine, unremarkable, completely consistent with everything he had already told investigators. The alibi held. The phone records collapsed. The timeline never worked. And instead of following where the evidence pointed, Floyd County chose a different direction entirely. When the facts won't build the case you need, you build the man instead. David Camm had been unfaithful across the length of his marriage. 12 women. Some were sustained affairs. Some were women he pursued and was rejected by. It started within months of their wedding, and it continued. He left Kim once while she was pregnant with Jill to move in with another woman. He pursued female colleagues while wearing the badge of the Indiana State Police. None of it reflects well on him. None of it is in dispute, and none of it is evidence of murder. People end marriages every single day without ending lives. Infidelity has a logical exit. It is called divorce. If David wanted out of that marriage, he had options that did not require killing his 2 children. The prosecution never once explained how an affair led to 3 bodies in a garage. They never tried to. because the affairs were never meant to prove motive. They were meant to do one thing only: make 12 jurors dislike David Camm so deeply that they would stop caring whether the timeline was physically possible. 12 women, one by one, story after story. The jury sat through all of it, and when the 8 dots came back up, when Stites took that stand and spoke with the full authority of fabricated credentials, the jury was already looking at David Camm through a completely different lens. Not as a man with an airtight alibi, as a man they had spent days learning to resent. That was the entire strategy. And in February 2002, walking into trial 1, it was already working. Kim was 35, Bradley was 7, Jill was 5. Before we walk into that courtroom, if you're new here, subscribe, because what is about to happen to this family's case deserves a full audience. Trial 1 began in February 2002. Robert Stites took the stand and introduced himself as a professor, a crime scene reconstructionist, and a PhD candidate in fluid dynamics, the science of how liquids move through air. He spoke with an authority that filled a room. He explained HVIS to the jury simply, clearly, and with complete confidence. 8 dots. Gunshot blowback. David was within 3 to 4 feet of Jill when she was shot. 100% certain. Rod Englert followed and confirmed every finding, adding that a blood stain on David's shoe was consistent with shooting Kim at close range. 2 experts, 1 conclusion. The science, they said, was settled. The defense fought back. Their analyst argued transfer stains, not HVIS. When David leaned across the back seat to reach Bradley, his shirt made contact with Jill's blood-soaked hair. To demonstrate it, the defense brought a wig into the courtroom, soaked it in blood, dragged a t-shirt across it, replicating the exact motion David's shirt would have made pulling Bradley from the vehicle. The pattern that appeared on the shirt looked remarkably similar to the 8 dots. The jury watched. They deliberated for 3 days. On March 17, 2002, guilty. 3 counts of murder, 195 years. David was let out in handcuffs from the same justice system he had served for a decade. Inside his cell, the first 6 months were defined by one recurring thought. Every time he heard keys rattling outside that door, he thought, "This is it. They figured it out. They know it wasn't me." After 6 months, that hope changed shape. It became something harder, something quieter. He stopped waiting for rescue and started preparing for a long fight. In August 2004, the Indiana Court of Appeals overturned the conviction. The ruling was clear. Allowing 12 women to testify about David's affairs had unfairly poisoned the jury. The prosecutor had never connected those affairs to the murders. He had simply used them to make the jury dislike David enough to convict. The court described the evidence against Camm as far from overwhelming. A new trial was ordered. Stan Faith had by then been voted out of office. Keith Henderson took over as Floyd County prosecutor, and within weeks announced the second trial was moving forward. The door had opened, and then it slammed shut again. But before trial 2 began, something happened that should have ended this case entirely. The gray sweatshirt had been sitting in evidence for nearly 5 years. Gray, prison issue. Backbone written inside the collar in black marker, found beside Bradley's body on the night of the murders. It contained 2 unknown DNA profiles, 1 male, 1 female. Stan Faith had told the court the DNA had been run through CODIS, the National DNA Database, with no results. The defense didn't believe it. They filed motions demanding resubmission under direct court supervision. The prosecution resisted at every step. A direct court order was required to force it through. The DNA came back within hours of submission. The male profile matched Charles Darnell Boney. Since 1989, Charles Boney had been targeting women across Indiana, cornering them, holding them at gunpoint. He didn't want wallets or jewelry. He made them take off their shoes. Law enforcement had a name for him, the Shoe Bandit. He left physical trauma on the feet of his victims. He stalked some of them beforehand, calling them, asking what they were wearing, asking if they had on heels. He was convicted on 3 counts of armed robbery and 3 counts of criminal confinement, all against women. He was released on parole just weeks before the Camm family was murdered. Now look back at that crime scene. Kim's shoes, removed from her feet, placed neatly on the roof of the Bronco, side by side, toes pointing outward. The coroner's report: bruising and deep abrasions on the tops of both of Kim's feet, consistent with being violently handled while she was still alive. The signature was identical, the same man, the same compulsion, the same calling card, left on the roof of that car in the middle of a crime scene. And then, a palm print on the outside passenger door of Kim's Bronco, missed in the original crime scene sweep, matched to Charles Boney. His DNA on the sweatshirt, his nickname written inside it, his palm print on the car, his signature on Kim's feet and on the roof of the Bronco. In a just world, David Camm walks out of prison that afternoon. His DNA, his nickname, his palm print, his signature carved into that crime scene from the very first night. And David Camm was still sitting in a prison cell. Subscribe if you need to know how that was even legally possible. But admitting David was innocent meant admitting the system had spent 5 years protecting a corrupt conclusion. It meant admitting Stan Faith had built a murder case on confirmation bias and an unverified forensic photographer. They could not say that. So they changed the script instead. Charles Boney was arrested, placed in a room, and given a choice: go down alone for a triple homicide, or give them what they need to keep David Camm in the picture. Boney looked at that choice, and he started talking. His first version: he had nothing to do with the murders, never met David Camm, never been to that house. The sweatshirt? Dropped in a charity donation box after getting out of prison. He agreed to a polygraph. Deception detected. Released anyway. 2 weeks later, his palm print came back confirmed. He was arrested again. Second version: he knew David. They had met on a basketball court by chance. No phone calls, no planning, no paper trail. During a casual encounter, David had asked him to get hold of an untraceable gun. Boney had no idea what it was for. He just saw $250. He handed over the weapon wrapped in his gray sweatshirt. That was all. Third version: he was actually at the house that night, came to deliver the gun personally. Kim pulled into the garage. David followed her in. Boney heard arguing, then gunfire. David came back out and pointed the gun at him. It jammed. Boney ran. And then, the shoe story. Fleeing the garage in a full panic, he claims he tripped over Kim's shoes on the garage floor. In the middle of escaping a violent crime scene, he paused, picked up both shoes, walked to the Bronco, and placed them side by side on the roof. The autopsy had documented deep bruising and abrasions on the tops of both of Kim's feet, marks consistent with being violently handled while she was still alive. This was not a clumsy trip in the dark. This was Charles Boney doing exactly what Charles Boney had always done. The interrogation transcripts revealed something else entirely. When detectives first asked how Boney knew David, Boney said he didn't. The detective responded, "Let's say you did know him, maybe through basketball." Boney paused. "Yeah, maybe basketball." When his timeline conflicted with confirmed facts, Kim and the children had been seen alive at the pool until 7:15 p.m., his story quietly shifted to accommodate it. Dr. Kim Rossmo, a criminal justice professor at Texas State University, reviewed all 35 hours of those interrogation recordings and reached a single conclusion. Boney was never treated as a suspect. He was treated as a resource. Investigators were not trying to find the truth. They were trying to build a version of events that kept David Camm in the picture. Boney had a girlfriend at the time, Mala Mattingly. On the night of September 28, 2000, Boney left their home and told her he was going to help a friend. He returned after midnight, breathing hard, sweating through his clothes, a scraped knee. And then, not mentioning it, but showing it, holding it out, wanting her to look at it, he produced the gun. Investigators would later conclude this was almost certainly the murder weapon, a weapon that has never been found. Mala was terrified. She asked him to leave. The next morning, Boney insisted the two of them sit down with his mother and watch the news together. She left him 2 weeks later. She told investigators she believed something had broken in him. There was one more piece of the Faith-Boney connection that has never been fully explained. Stan Faith, the prosecutor who built the original case against David Camm, who assured the defense the sweatshirt DNA had returned no CODIS match, was a longtime personal friend of Boney's mother. By early 2005, Faith had lost his re-election bid and was working as a private defense attorney. When Boney was handcuffed and told he needed a lawyer, he did not ask for a public defender. He asked for Stan Faith, the man who prosecuted David Camm, who sat on the DNA results, who built the case. The court denied it immediately. The conflict was too enormous to ignore. And in the 2 weeks between Boney's DNA being identified and his formal arrest, phone records showed 33 calls between Boney and the Floyd County Prosecutor's Office. 33 calls. 14 days before he was even officially a suspect. The man whose DNA was on that sweatshirt called the prosecutor's office 33 times before he was ever formally arrested. If that sentence made you stop, good. It should. Stay with me. January 2006, Boney went to trial first in Floyd County. His DNA, his palm print, Mala placing him at home after midnight breathless and holding a gun, his own admission that he was at the scene. The jury convicted him. 225 years. But the state made him a quiet promise. Testify against David Camm. Point his finger across a courtroom and say David pulled the trigger, and he would not face the death penalty. Boney took the deal. Trial 2 began January 17, 2006. With the affair's testimony permanently barred by the Court of Appeals, prosecutor Keith Henderson needed a new motive. What he presented was a deeply disturbing and entirely unverified theory that David had been mistreating his 5-year-old daughter and committed the murders to conceal it. The defense medical examiner dismantled the claim completely under oath. No physical evidence, no medical basis, not a single clinical finding to support it. Henderson pushed forward anyway. Meanwhile, 2 of the state's own witnesses were being pressured to alter their testimony. Lynn Scamahorn was a DNA analyst with the Indiana State Police Crime Lab. She had run over 300 individual tests on Boney's sweatshirt. During the first trial, Stan Faith pulled her aside and told her exactly what he needed, that she had found David Camm's DNA on that sweatshirt. She had not found it. It was not there. She told Faith that directly. Faith screamed at her, threatened to have her fired, threatened to charge her with obstruction of justice if she refused to say what he needed. She refused. When she testified about that moment in open court, 300 tests, complete refusal to lie, a prosecutor threatening her career. She broke down on the stand. John Singleton, a fingerprint analyst, faced the same pressure. Faith pushed him to soften his testimony about the unidentified palm print on Kim's Bronco, the one that was later confirmed as Boney's. Make it seem less significant. Blur the edges. Singleton refused too. 2 analysts, 2 threats. 1 prosecutor who needed inconvenient facts to disappear. And then there was Henderson's book deal. While actively prosecuting David Camm in Trial 2, Henderson had signed a contract to write a book about the case, received an advance payment, and had already written portions of the manuscript. The defense discovered it and filed to have him removed from the case. Henderson fought it for 2 years. David sat in a cell. The appeal crawled forward. The Indiana Supreme Court eventually removed Henderson and issued a formal public reprimand. 2 years of David's life gone because a prosecutor was protecting a publishing deal. One final detail from this period. A police officer named Myron Wilkerson, not assigned to the Camm case, a distant relative of Charles Boney, accessed the evidence room after Boney's arrest and removed Kim Camm's cell phone. No sign-out log, no authorization. When the phone was recovered, every fingerprint on it had been wiped clean. Wilkerson died before the 3rd trial. He was never charged. Whatever was on that phone, whoever contacted Kim in the hours before she came home that Thursday evening, is gone forever. March 3, 2006. Guilty again. Life without parole. 2 convictions. A book deal. A wiped phone. Witnesses threatened on the courthouse steps. David Camm had now spent years in prison, while every person responsible for keeping him there faced nothing. Subscribe, because Trial 3 is where this entire machine finally breaks. In 2009, the Indiana Supreme Court overturned the 2nd conviction. Their words were precise. Missing from this record is any competent evidence of the premise that the defendant molested the child. 0 physical evidence, a manufactured motive. The court also cited improper closing arguments and hearsay used prejudicially throughout the trial. Floyd County had now lost 2 cases, 2 convictions, and what remained of their credibility. Their ego, however, was intact. They refused to stop. The third trial was moved 140 miles away to Lebanon, Indiana, Boone County. After 13 years of saturation media coverage in Floyd County, finding an impartial jury there was impossible. The defense arrived with the full weight of forensic science behind them. They took David's basketball shirt, the 8 dots, the foundation of 2 convictions, and placed it under high-powered microscopes. What the microscope found was this. Trapped inside the dried blood drops were microscopic fabric fibers, pressed and embedded into the stain itself. That only happens one way, when fabric makes direct physical contact with a blood-soaked surface. The blood had not traveled through air from a gun barrel. It had transferred onto David's shirt when he leaned across Jill's body to pull his son from the back of the Bronco. Exactly what David had said from the very first night. Exactly what the defense had argued in 2 previous trials. Now there was microscopic proof. Then came Robert Stites. The defense pulled his background files. PhD candidate in fluid dynamics, fabricated. Professor, fabricated. Crime scene reconstructionist, fabricated. He had no PhD. He was not a professor. He was a photographer who had never processed a homicide scene before the night he walked into the Camm garage. Robert Stites took the stand in trial 3, this time called by the defense, and admitted everything. He had lied under oath in 2 separate trials. His science was not science. His certainty was performance. And Stan Faith, the original prosecutor, had helped him construct the false credentials that made 2 juries believe him. The state's case had not simply been flawed, it had been criminally manufactured from the beginning. Charles Boney testified for the first time in any Camm proceeding, claimed David had orchestrated everything. The defense laid out 6 different confessions in 6 different versions, spanning 5 years of shifting stories, interrogation transcripts where detectives fed him answers, and a timeline that contradicted confirmed facts at every turn. His credibility didn't survive it. October 24, 2013. The jury deliberated for less than 8 hours. Not guilty. David Camm did not walk out of that courtroom celebrating. He walked out quietly. Because there is nothing to celebrate when the people who murdered your wife and children did so 13 years ago, and the years since have been spent fighting a system that looked directly at the truth and chose to bury it instead. The handcuffs came off. He stepped outside into the cold Indiana air. And somewhere in that moment, the 4078th day, whatever had kept him upright through 3 trials and 13 years of a cell finally had somewhere to go. Charles Boney remains in prison serving 225 years. He has never stopped insisting David Camm pulled the trigger. Stan Faith was never charged. Robert Stites was never charged. Myron Wilkerson, the officer who removed Kim's cell phone from evidence and wiped it clean, died before the 3rd trial without ever facing a courtroom. The murder weapon has never been recovered. David Camm received civil settlements from both Floyd County and the Indiana State Police. The amounts were never disclosed. The people who cost him 4,078 days kept their freedom, their reputations, and in some cases, their careers. Kim Wren Camm was 35 years old. She had built exactly the life she wanted. The career, the home on Lockhart Road, the 2 kids, the man she had chosen to fight for and rebuild with. She deserved to grow old in it. Bradley was 7. He was trying to get away. He was scrambling toward the back of that Bronco because the instinct to survive is that powerful, even in a child who cannot fully understand the danger. He deserved a whole life. Jill was 5. She never even had time to understand what was happening. She deserved everything. They did not get justice. They got 13 years of institutional ego dressed up as prosecution. And the fact that the man responsible for their deaths spent 5 of those years walking free while an innocent man sat in a cell, that is not a footnote in this story. That is the story. 4,078 days, 3 trials. A photographer with fake credentials who fooled 2 juries. A prosecutor who screamed at a DNA analyst for refusing to lie. A gray sweatshirt that sat under a child's body for 4.5 years. and a real killer who walked free while the system protected its own mistake. If this case is sitting with you, subscribe, hit the bell, share this with someone who still thinks the justice system always gets it right. 3 questions before you go. Do you believe Stan Faith knew Charles Boney was the real killer from the very beginning? Or was it ego protecting a mistake that spiraled so far it became impossible to reverse? If the sweatshirt DNA had been submitted to CODIS in October 2000, the way it was supposed to be, does David Camm ever get arrested at all? And Charles Boney, still in that prison, still pointing his finger, after everything you just heard, do you believe a single word he says? Drop your answers below. We read every one. And if this case is still sitting with you an hour from now, you already know it was worth your time.